Well, for more on this vote at the European Parliament, we can head now to Brussels and speak to our correspondent, Dave Keating, who is standing by. Dave, just talk us through exactly what was voted on today and what would this ban look like and mean for ordinary Europeans, people living in Europe like yourself and me?
Well, this was an initiative from President Jean-Claude Juncker, who took office 4 years ago. They're really looking for legislation where they can demonstrate the utility of the European Union to people. This is viewed as a popular initiative. What it will do under the version of the legislation adopted by the Parliament today, all single-use plastics, in the categories you heard described there by Commissioner Vella, will be banned by 2021, and national governments will have to recycle 90% of plastic bottles by 2025. Now, the reason that single-use plastics are being targeted is because of the massive problem of marine litter that they cause. They actually make up 70% of that mountain of garbage that's floating around in our oceans and seas. So this is quite an ambitious version of the legislation that the Parliament has passed today. Interestingly, they added a proviso that tobacco companies will have to pay for the cost of cleaning up cigarette butts. So we'll see what happens with that in the course of the negotiations.
But Dave, we shouldn't forget, of course, that this vote is just a stage one of a much longer legal process within the European Union, one that, of course, could still see this whole plan come unstuck.
Yeah, exactly. This is just one step. EU lawmaking works a little bit like US lawmaking. For those familiar with how it works there, the House of Representatives passes a version of a bill and the Senate passes a version of a bill, and they have to be reconciled. The EU works exactly the same. The European Parliament passes a version, and then the European Council, made up of each of the 28 national governments of the EU, passes a piece of legislation. Environmentalists cheering this vote result today will also know that the European Parliament always adopts much more ambitious versions of the legislation than what actually ends up being adopted, because the national governments in the EU are much more conservative. They tend to pull things back. And we've already heard from several member states, particularly those in Southern and Eastern Europe, that they think the targets in this legislation are not deliverable. So we'll see a vote from the 28 environment ministers from the national governments at some point before the end of the year, and then they'll have negotiations. I expect to see a final version of this legislation early next year. They want to get this done before the end of this term and the European Parliament elections, which take place in May. They want to be able to campaign on this. But I would say you can probably see some of these target dates move later. The 2021 and 2025 targets will probably be moved later, and I would suspect that this proviso for tobacco companies may also be at risk when national governments discuss this.
Dave Keating, our correspondent in Brussels, thank you very much.